All right, so another crazy week in the markets. I got obviously the Fed news was the biggest news from this past week. We had Bitcoin news. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. I want to weigh in on the knots core debate. First things first, if you get value out of the video, please like and subscribe as always. So, first things first, let's talk about the biggest news from this past week being the Fed cut 25 basis points. And I seen this point from Bitcoin Archive. When the Fed cuts rates with stocks within 2% of record highs, the S&P 500 finished the next 12 months higher every single time, 20 out of 20. So they go back to 1980, and the average is actually 13.9% higher. So we will see how that goes. Obviously, nobody knows. Technically, they did it twice within the last 52 weeks, the last one being November of 2024. Uh, Almost certainly we're going to end higher then. There actually is there was actually about five, or actually, sorry, six of the times it's actually been lower after 6 months, but every single time it's been higher after 12 months. So that's why I'm optimistic as far as stocks go over the next year. I do think we're overdue for a pullback. I want to be very clear there. I certainly think we're overdue for a pullback, but I think the most likely scenario is we continue to grind higher into the end of the year, and then early to mid next year, possibly in the spring again, but I think, in the first half of next year, we probably see that, 10, 15, 20% pullback, and then we probably close the year modestly up. That's my best guess. Obviously, I could be wrong, but that's my best guess. But again, when it comes to rates going down considerably, I I don't think they're going to go down considerably. That's not what the market is pricing in. But if they are going down, it's hard to believe that we're going to see some major crash, right? I think we are certainly overdue for a pullback, but I think it's unlikely that we see some alarmingly big crash. It's just not that it's not possible. It's just unlikely. Like it's really just unlikely. It's not like there's some massive cracks in the economy. I certainly think it's weak or leaning on the weaker side, but it's not like there's massive cracks. So that's what I'm thinking. And the reason for that is when you look at history, the overwhelming majority of the time, that's what happens, right? Obviously, I certainly could be wrong. Don't assume that I'm going to be right, but overwhelming majority of the time, that's what ends up happening. So I also want to weigh in. This is probably honestly the most important thing to me, at least, is the core versus knots debate. Now, I really should have, I really should have weighed in on this sooner because I've been following it pretty close. The first thing I would preface with here is I am not an overly technical person, but I would also preface that statement by saying you really don't need to be an overly technical person to understand what's going on here. Now, the debate is in regards to the op return. Now, what that means is how much arbitrary data can be added to transactions. That's what the debate is on. And the core, or at least most of the people within core, right, the developers, they want to increase the size. And the problem comes in is they want to make it way bigger. The current limit, I believe, is 80 bytes, and they want to increase it to 100,000. So they want to make it like way, way, way bigger. Like it's not like they want to make it a little bit bigger. They want to make it way bigger. So that's where the problem comes in. So Bitcoin underscore elementary on Twitter here says, "For supporters, the devs know what's best. Users' opinions don't matter. Opposers are too retarded to understand the technical reasoning. Bitcoin is more than just a journey. Check out my JPEGs." And then not supporters. Bitcoin is money. It's important for all of humanity that we don't mess this up. Follow the money to think critically. GFY running knots. So the big problem with the knots, or sorry, with the knots in the core debate is I think it's undeniable that the people that are right, that are on the right philosophical side are the knots side. And the reason for that is the people on the core side, it's hard to not notice that these are people that don't really care about the actual hardcore, Bitcoin maxi aspect of it. Their concern is we want to make the miners more money and we want to branch in a little bit of a different direction. In my opinion, that's absolutely insane because you simply have to look at it based on a cost benefit analysis. What is the benefit of what the core side wants? The benefit is okay, maybe the miners make a little bit more money, and they've also argued that it might be a little bit more accurate in estimating fees. What is the downside? The downside is number one, it's going to be harder and harder over time for an average Joe to run their own node, which is one of the things that separates Bitcoin from 99.999% of other cryptocurrencies is you cannot run your own Solana node. You cannot run your own Ethereum node, Cardano. Like the list goes on and on. But you can do it with Bitcoin. And the reason for that is that there is not number one, the block transaction is small, and number two, we don't allow arbitrary garbage on the blockchain or in transactions. So that's the first downside. But the other big downside is it's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when some highly questionable, illegal in 99.9% of places material ends up on the blockchain. And I'm not going to describe what it is, but you can probably imagine what it is. And a lot of people say, oh, but my free speech. And it's like, no. The big problem here is if that happens, especially if a future administration that isn't so friendly towards crypto or Bitcoin, and I'm just talking about the U.S. I'm not talking about the long list of other countries that already do have administrations that are super friendly. Like, take Canada, for example, right? I mean, when has the current administration, the previous administration was clearly hostile to it, but when has the previous administration said anything positive? Or the current one, I mean, right? So that's what I mean. What happens if an Elizabeth Warren type ends up in power? They're going to have a field day. They're going to hold people in front of Congress. They're going to do whatever they can to cripple Bitcoin. So like getting back to my main point is the cost benefit analysis. There is arguably like very, very, very little benefit to making the change that they're making. A lot of people would argue zero benefit. I'm not technical enough to say that with 100% confidence. I lean that direction, but I'm not confident enough to say that with 100% confidence. I've seen many people that say the fee estimation thing is overrated. And not to mention, too, the other thing that comes to the whole, it's going to make the miners more money. Well, number one, why do we assume that the miners need more money? And number two, even if the miners start to become unprofitable, is that not the whole point of the difficulty adjustment? Like, if it starts to become harder and harder for miners to make money, the difficulty adjustment will just come down and it'll become easier again. So I'm really just that point just really just boggles my mind. So again, I'm very skeptical that there's any benefit to what the core 30 update is providing. Like I'm very skeptical. Like what is the benefit? So that's my thoughts on the Knots core debate. I think it's very obvious Knots is on the right side of this. And history will tell, but I think it's very obvious. Elon Musk, I've been to DC many times since May. The government is basically unfixable. I applaud David Sachs' notable efforts, but at the end of the day, if you look at our national debt, if AI robots don't solve our national debt, we're toast. Lynn Alden says Musk is saying that nothing stops this train. Might as well have a public chat about this at this point would be hilarious, actually. And again, this is what we've said time and time again that um, the government, the only way that we can get ourselves out of the debt crisis is one of two ways. Number one is we radically cut spending, and the only way to do that is to cut entitlements, which is, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. In Canada, it's healthcare. Like same, and not only that, like welfare, stuff like that, right? That's the only way that we get ourselves out of this mess. And there's no way in hell that people are going to vote for that, right? There's no way people are going to vote for that, which leaves us with one option. We print and inflate our way out. And what does that mean? That means that Bitcoin is going to do very well. The stock market is going to do very well. And even gold and real estate are going to do really well. So that's the reality, right? That's the reality. Amazon is hiring a crypto professional for 400,000 per year, right? So why is this important? Well, I think it should be obvious, but this is important because some of these big companies are slowly coming around, right? They're slowly coming around. And again, my whole point with Bitcoin is once we're at the point to where the majority of S&P companies, the majority of these Meg 7 companies, once it's at the point to where they're converting a certain amount of their cash and profits into Bitcoin, then we probably people the big question with Bitcoin is that when do we reach the point of saturation? And I think that's when the majority of these big companies are just blindingly putting money into Bitcoin, then we'll know. Then we'll know. But we're still a ways off that, but we are in the early innings of it. The next one here is from Bitcoin News. The top 10 public Bitcoin treasuries now hold 86% of the 1 million Bitcoin owned by the top 100. And I would also point out that MSTR is about about just over 60% of that. So I bring this up because a lot of people talk about the Bitcoin treasury companies as oh they're the the modern or this halving cycles NFTs or the altcoins. And I think that again, I've said this time and time again, I think that's a really stupid comparison. And the reason for that is if you're going to argue that Bitcoin is the greatest, the hardest money known to man, why would the corporations not want to own it? Right? Either it's the best money known to man, and the corporations should want to own it, or it isn't, and they shouldn't. And if it isn't, then why do you own it in the first place? Right? It doesn't make any sense. So the one caveat that people point out is that people are going to take on leverage and excess debt. And although I understand that, yeah, that is going to happen, the comeback to that and the caveat to that point is okay, well, 86% of the Bitcoin of these treasury companies are owned by the top 10. And of the ones in the top 10, it's hard to make a compelling case that any of them are in any trouble. And the even more important point is strategy is by far the biggest, and strategy has already been through a bear market. And they're if anything, they're better positioned going into this cycle. If you want to argue that we're going into a bear market, I think that traditional bear markets are a thing of the past. Although we're still going to see pullbacks, obviously. But I think that 80-90% drawdowns are going to be a thing of the past. So even if you think that's not true, I mean, we saw 80% pullback roughly in 2022. Why, if they can only make it through it once, why could they not do it again? So this argument really, really makes no sense, especially when you consider the fact that the way that they go about acquiring Bitcoin is in a smarter and more efficient way than ever. And the overwhelming majority of their debt is after the next halving anyway. So it's overwhelmingly likely that the price of Bitcoin is going to be higher now than it is when a lot of their debt is coming due. And when you look at the principal never comes due. The principal never comes due. All Bitcoin has to do is return more than 10% per year, and they are literally getting free money, like free money. And it's also funny because the last point I wanted to leave it on here is a lot of people have this saying of the first country to print their own money and buy Bitcoin wins, right? You hear this a lot. And the crazy thing about it is this is exactly what strategy is doing, especially with now that they have the preferreds. The only difference you could argue is they're paying a higher interest rate, but I mean there's a lot of countries in the world where the interest rates are well into the double digits. right? Technically, US, okay, they could pay, the American government could borrow at 4% and buy Bitcoin. The Japanese government could borrow at like 1% or whatever it is and buy Bitcoin. Yeah, that's true. But you also have to keep in mind that what percentage of company or of countries even, if they decided to start doing this tomorrow, could even get more Bitcoin than strategy could. Like I bet you it's maybe what, 10%, maybe 20% of the countries in the world. Like people are not even close to grasping just how significant it is what strategy is doing. Like again, we're going to look back at this in 10 to 20 years and think this is just absolute genius. Like modern day Berkshire Hathaway levels of genius. Like that's what we're going to look back on it as. Uh, People look back and say Berkshire Hathaway has like 400 billion in cash and just how insane that is. But they're also going to look back and be like, strategy has 10 times, more than 10 times the Bitcoin of the next highest company. Like that is absolutely and utterly insane. Like that would be like Nvidia being like a $30 trillion company right now. That's the levels of insanity that we are going to look back at. So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about this week. If you got value in the video, like I said, please like, subscribe, comment, check out those links below, and stay tuned for more.